I want to get really personal on this episode because as millennials, my people, big shout out to all my people in Boston and in Syracuse, we struggle mightily, Pops. We struggle mightily in dealing with our boomer bosses. And what I want to talk about today, what we're going to get into is it even worth our time to get to know our boomer manager, to seek to understand their perspective? Because, Pops, I got to be honest, sometimes it feels like a giant waste.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll have a lot to say. I'll say it on the other side of the intro. It's episode 46. Is it a waste of time to understand the boss? Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Kelly Riggs. This podcast is about leadership, but not just any kind of leadership. Counter-mentor leadership, which is our approach to dealing with the chaotic four-generation workplace. It's leadership that works, not theory or hypothetical models. That's the challenge. The workplace has changed dramatically, but the way managers lead has not.
I'm Robbie Riggs. The problem is ineffective leaders. Research shows that as few as 1 in 7 leaders are effective. The purpose of this show is to make sure you're not part of the 86% of leaders who are failing. In a sarcastic kind of way, of course. Welcome to the podcast. By the way, if you'd like to read our book, Counter Mentor Leadership, How to Unlock the Potential of the Four-Generation Workplace, we'll tell you how to get a free hardcover copy at the end of the podcast.
Hey, welcome in. It's the Counter Mentor Leadership Podcast. I'm Kelly Riggs, Robbie Riggs. Follow me on Twitter at Kelly Riggs. Don't waste your time with Robbie. You don't get anything valuable there anyway. He's a millennial.
Please, great follow.
We're gonna talk about it. Also follow us at Counter Mentors, and you can find all our past episodes, Rob, on video at a website. We're also on iTunes, as many of you know. Hey, had somebody give us a shout this week. They listened to the open and the closing of the show. They got a free book.
That's right.
Wrote a review for the show. We like that. We want to get more and more of those going along. Hey, this week, episode 46. I'm trying to figure out if this is going to work for me or not. If it's going to come down in my favor or not.
It never does. So I don't see why you think this will be different. Yeah.
It is a waste. Is it a waste of time to understand the boss? And I loved your open because, I think a lot of times, Rob, people millennials come into the workplace and they haven't really stopped to try to understand the person they work for or going to work for. And what is really frustrating to me is it just really seems like they do sometimes exactly what they accuse boomers of do, putting all boomer bosses in one box and saying they're all this way, they're all anti-technology, or they're all anti, whatever. And then they throw everybody in the same bucket. I mean, it's really an interesting topic.
Yeah, it's a huge frustration on both sides. And obviously from the side that is the subordinate, which is really, in this episode, we're really going to talk about the traditional boss, right? The boomer old school supervisor that is acting as the leader, or probably not as a leader, probably more like a taskmaster, to the younger, the kids, the know-it-all digital self-promoters. So in this case,
did you just make my point? Did you just made my point? All boomers are taskmasters. That's what I know.
I was sorry. You broke up there. My ear must be cutting out. I think the point is that this is the number one topic at happy hour, at golf, at yoga, whatever. This topic of struggling and lamenting and coming together to complain about the boss or the partner or the CEO or the VP or whatever, right? Whatever industry you're in. And there's a real struggle because there's always that sense of, she doesn't get me. Right? He doesn't understand my perspective. He doesn't know what's going on. Or, geez, he is so out of touch. What in the world is he thinking? So this is something that we talk about all the time. And I know for me, as I have risen and become a leader and become, a leader of a consulting firm and running a big team, it's something that I worry about. Like, I never want to be in that position where people go, oh gosh, Riggs doesn't get it. So it's an active thing that I'm talking about with Pops. As early in my career, man, this was something that was talked about a lot.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that we talk about it in his show, and here's why. That is almost a stereotype as well. It's almost like, all millennials don't get boomers and all boomers don't get millennials. And
Right.
That's not true. What we really know is that millennials, very generally speaking, as a broad group, they want to grow. They want to access the wisdom and experience of the boomer. It's not the knowledge and experience that they really have a problem with. It's the way they go about leading a team or leading them as a group. By the way, shout out to one of our listeners and a client as well, Tom DeHaven, over one of our clients, sent in a question and comment this week about this very topic. He said, quote, "In my opinion, millennials need coaching on dealing with baby boomers."
I love that he wrote it that way. We were gonna title this episode "Why You Shouldn't Have to Babysit Baby Boomers," but we decided to flip it and make it not a little less derogatory, because I beat the pops down every week, as our listeners know.
Yes.
But it's such a great thing, because from the outside looking in, and Pops, we've had this discussion in various ways over the course of the last 45 episodes. Which, by the way, 45 episodes is crazy. And so we've had this discussion, and we always come back to, you have a choice as an employee, as one of the kids. Your choice is I guess you have three choices. You either ignore it and whatever, move on, or you engage and really try to understand and build a relationship, or you leave. And of course, the thing that boomers love to say is that, well, these kids just don't get it. They don't want to work hard. They're job hoppers. And I mean, we've beaten that to death, and we've disproven that over and over and over. And I think the point is that this is a really, we beat leaders up a lot in this show. And this is one of those times where we really want to talk to the millennials and say, whoa, you should be engaging and investing in that relationship, or should you? And I think that's really what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious answer to me is absolutely. I can't imagine in my career anywhere, and shocker, I actually was a young person once upon a time, and when I went to work, I was the new guy, and all that kind of thing, and it was always stressed to me that when you insert yourself into a new team, the first thing you want to do is try to assimilate into that team, find out what their norms are, how they do things, and sort of make your mark before you start making waves was the big deal. And so oftentimes you and I have conversations with millennials, and this is obviously not anywhere near the first time we've ever had this conversation. We deal with millennials all the time, and they're like, yeah, my boss doesn't get me. My boss doesn't do all the things that you said. And then we'll ask, okay, I'm sure that's probably absolutely the truth. Let's set it aside for a minute, and let me ask you this question. Tell me what you know about your boss. Tell what is important to him or her.
Right.
And immediately it'll come out. It's like, oh, they're this and they're that. No, I didn't ask you for your opinion based on what's important to them. And what we find out very rapidly is we've not even had any substantive conversations whatsoever. And so, yeah, easily we can put that on the boomer. We can say, look, the boomer leader, the boss.
That's the first place we're going to put the blame, right? I mean, that's where we're going to start. Yeah.
But that doesn't help millennials if their boss doesn't do that. So millennials will say, okay, so what do I do? It's real simple. You've got to start to ask the questions. In many cases, you may have to start to break that ice and ask questions like, hey, I really want to be a fantastic employee. I want to be the best employee you got. What do I need to do? What's important to you? Help me be the best employee I can be. I know a lot of boomer bosses that probably fall out of their chairs.
Yeah, I think it's important to note here that a couple of things. Number one, you have to understand also the personality of your leader. Remember, the boomer generation, we talk about, general themes in the generation. Not that everyone is this way, but generally speaking, they grew up in a very specific type of household. And typically, they did not grow up seeing that strong emotional connection, especially for the men, from their father figure. So especially if you're talking about a male boomer, he has probably not been taught how to, especially if he's not a people personality, hasn't been taught how to relate well and communicate well, and especially show affection or encouragement. So what I learned early on is I had some key people that I thought they hated me. And I mean, it was painful. And after lots of hard conversations with you and working through it and getting your counsel, I quickly flipped that and found out that they had a high opinion of me, or they even liked me, but their personality was not showing in a way that I was open to it. So I was making an assumption about them that was leading me to resent them. And in many cases be like, I want out of this thing. And because I had counsel, because I had coaching that said, seek to understand their perspective, I very quickly realized that it not only was it not me, but it was much more them and their personality. And as I started speaking their language, and as I started communicating with them and figuring out what can I do to be great for you, it was incredible the impact that had. And I was able to build really strong relationships. So I'm going to be clear. My answer to this question is absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Very worst case scenario, you invest time in building that relationship and you figure out that person wants nothing to do with you, and then you leave. I believe it is absolutely worth the time.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And when you look at the struggle between boomers and millennials, many times those boomers have been influenced by their parents' generation as well.
Yeah, totally.
They can be more stoic. They can be less likely to show, as you mentioned, emotion, to be encouraging. They're just not comfortable with those kinds of things, or it's not a part of their habits. Should they change? Should they learn? Absolutely. But it validates exactly what we get from Gallup. The Gallup organization survey says roughly 1 in 5 millennials gets usable feedback in the workplace. Yeah. That's worthwhile. Yeah, that's our anecdotal experience as well. 4 out of 5 millennials roughly are saying, look, my boss didn't tell me anything.
That's right.
What do I do? Well, what you do is take initiative and just say, hey, can I get 10 minutes of your time on the calendar next week? Just a couple of things I want to cover with you. And they go, okay. And you walk in armed with 2 or 3, 4 open-ended questions, Rob, just designed to get that boomer, that boss, to open up and maybe tell you a few things.
That's right. And that's such a great tactic. And obviously this goes both ways, but we talk all the time on this show, and we talk about it at length in our book about the criticality of the one-on-one meeting. You can leverage those exact same principles going from below. I can have that exact same dialogue from below and ask similar questions, because that's all you're trying to do. You're trying to start a conversation, trying to build a relationship, and you can do that, and it's worth your time. Frankly, we know that generally speaking, the boss loves hard work. They value that loyalty, that person that's going to get the job done. So when you go in and say, I want to add value, I want to get the job done, what is the best way that I can do that? Give me some specific feedback or some specific tactics. What's the downside? I mean, if they tell you, no, you suck, you're terrible, then leave. I don't, there's no downside. This is worth an investment of your time.
Absolutely. Well, the alternative, Rob, is to go in and say, look, I don't want to be in my seat at 8 o'clock. I want to come in at 10. I want to start my day at Starbucks. I want to be on my cell phone. I want to be this. Right. I want to be that, because I deserve it, because, you have to understand me. Listen, millennials, if that's who you want to be, great, but don't be surprised when that boomer, old school supervisor is offended by that. Instead, if you go in like Rob said and said, hey, I want to add value, tell me what works for you, what you're going to do is open them up, and you're going to begin to access that experiential wisdom that they have. Maybe they aren't tech savvy. Maybe they are doing things the old way and it's not the best way. That doesn't mean there's no value there. And this is what I find is the biggest mistake that millennials make, is they assume that because the boomer is not tech savvy or willing to change in certain areas, then there's nothing of value there. And that's just not true.
No, it's not true. And one of the best pieces of advice you gave me early in my career was that the best thing that I could do if I wanted to quickly make an impact and quickly add value, especially to my leader, was figure out how to make their job easier. Figure out how to make them look good and make their job easier. And it was not uncommon. Big shout out to Brian Gilbertson, my very first project manager. I would go to him and say, Brian, what else can I do? How else can I help you? What else can I do to make your life easier? Take things off your plate. And that started as simply as doing some status reporting for him. And I ended up, over the course of 4 months, I was running the project. And it was awesome. And it was great for him because we had a portfolio of projects and he could focus in other areas. And it was great for my career because I could then, the next time we re-upped that project, I was sold as the project manager. So it was great. And all I did was very simply say, I want to be great. I want to make your life easier. What do you hate doing that I can take off your plate? I mean, it was truly that simple.
Yeah, and see, you're doing so many things that boomer managers value at that point. You're demonstrating initiative. You're interested in what I care about. And as the boss, I've already got this sort of built-in mechanism that says, I'm the boss. You should be respecting me, not the other way around. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, you're hitting some positive triggers there.
Yeah,
make a lot of sense. But I would share with people, Robbie, that this goes back to my career in sales. In the world of selling, what I'm trying to do as a salesperson is understand my client, my prospect, and what it is that they need, they value, they want, and then seeing that if I can construct a solution that provides exactly what's important to them. So very long time ago, it became second nature for me to try to understand what's important to people and then try to serve that need. Well, that's just applying that principle to that boss-employee relationship. And when you do this, I mean, your stock is going to go up dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I like what you said. There's no downside, because if you find out it's not going to work or there's not a fit, you're moving on anyway. So instead of making an assumption and potentially losing a really, really good opportunity to grow and be mentored by somebody with 20 or more years experience, you're investing a little bit of time in a conversation, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, great.
Yeah. And I think that the biggest takeaway here is that this does take effort. This does take time and intent. And I'm telling you that when you do this, that in and of itself is eye-opening, is meaningful to the boss, and it's meaningful to them. Furthermore, being a positive attitude, having positivity. I mean, how often do we hear, Pops, that, she brings a positivity to the room, or she brings an energy, or, she just gets it. These phrases that are, on their surface, cheeseball and kind of cliche, but they're emotional phrases that you are making an impact. And choosing to be a positive impact on the situation is also a great way to connect and to understand. If you're coming to me and you're being a pain, and you're making this more difficult on me, or you're wasting my time, as a boss, I want nothing to do with that. But if you're coming to me and you're making things better, and you're bringing that positive energy, and that rising tide is truly raising all ships, then that's really important as well. So I think the second key tactic here is ensuring that you are being a positive influence on your workplace. And that is with your peers, and then obviously vertically with your boss. And Pops, we know that that's often in the attitude, the choices you make on a daily basis, which are really summarized by saying, what's your attitude?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't get a lot of career advice from my dad, so the things that he did say to me tend to stick and really stand out to me. One of the things that he said to me when I was a very young guy, I was telling him about some kind of problem I was having at work, and he said, son, here's what I can tell you. He said, there's nothing like a nervous boss, especially if you're the one making him nervous. I'm like, okay. That makes sense. So the idea is that when your head's down and doing your job well, and you're providing value to that boss because you understand what he or she needs or wants or values, whether or not you agree with it is irrelevant. Now, what you and I know, because we go out and train organizations together, we spend a lot of time saying, look, you boomers, you see millennials and they're different. It's because they were raised differently, right? They have a different worldview, different background. They weren't taught the same way in school. Everything is now collaborative and feedback, and being recognized and rewarded for seventh place and all that. We blame millennials for it, but we boomers and Gen Xers did that. So then they come into the workplace and we're surprised because they're different. Well, the same thing is true with the millennial, Rob. You come into the workplace. Why would a millennial be surprised that the boss wants them to be on time and the boss wants them to be dependable? And that's not a generational thing, but they've been used to really kind of loose structure and organizational constructs, right? So it turns out to be a problem.
Right. And not to make every podcast we do about expectations, but a lot of that goes back to, the criticality of expectations. So I think that the interesting thing here is as one of the kids, as a high performer, as a rock star, should they have a different view? Should they treat the boss differently? Obviously my mind goes to sports, right? Professional sports is such a great microcosm of all this, because you have the younger generation, the kids, who are being coached by typically the boss and a boomer leader. And should the high performance, high potential rock star employee be different? Is it okay for he or she to act out, not care because they're getting stuff done?
Yeah. Go ahead and go back about 3 episodes. We covered this one in great detail.
That's right.
It is one of the real issues. I want to take millennials and put them into the mind of a boomer boss just before we take our break, Rob, because that many times a new employee, especially a young employee, doesn't realize everything that's going on at the level above them, the person they work for. They're dealing with a ton of stress and issues and making their boss happy. And they have to deal with when they're short employees, people don't show up, and they've got customer issues and complaints, and they've got, if they're the business owner, they've got all the things that go with ownership. So they're dealing with an enormous amount of stress and issues and all that. And then they want to come in and upset the apple cart. Like, hey, why do we do this? Why don't we change it and all this? And many times what looks like resistance to the millennial, an unwillingness to change, sometimes is the same problem we always talk about with change. It's just exhaustion. Look, I can't deal with another problem today. Could you just do your job and, contribute energy and positivity to the workplace? And I think it really does make an enormous impact on millennials when they begin to get outside of themselves. The same thing we would say to the manager, and start to think about what's important to the boss. Right. So let's take a break. We need to take a quick time out. We'll come back on the other side. We'll discuss that more. And we got some principles we want to share with you as well. Stay with us.
Hey, it's Robbie. People often ask us if we work with companies, do we actually train leaders and train management teams, or did we just write a book? Well, of course we do. You can find all the details and more of these podcasts at countermentors.com. Or for more information, you can send a message to kr@countermentors.com. Hey, welcome back into Counter Mentor Leadership. Your boy Robbie Riggs here. Really excited to talk about, is this even worth our time? Should we as millennials be dealing with these boomer leaders? And Pops, you didn't actually answer my question, but I know the answer to the question that I asked before the break is yes, high performers should still engage and want to build that relationship with the boomer leader. It's so important. So we've talked a lot about emotional intelligence in the past, and we really, really harp on leaders. And as a leader, it is your job to have that high level of emotional intelligence. You set the bar. The culture reflects your attitude as a leader. But let's be really clear. Self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, all of those things, social skill, motivation, all of that matters to you as an employee. And Pops, for the kids listening, this emotional intelligence stuff is just as important. And if you don't show it, it can be debilitating to your career.
No, there's no question about that. The research is overwhelming. We know that well over half your success in the workplace has to do with your emotional intelligence. And I wish somebody would have told me that when I came out of school, because my whole concept of work was, I'm not going to play politics. I'm not going to be Captain Phony Baloney. I'm not going to do all that nonsense. I'm going to go heads down and I'm going to crush it. And they will promote me because I'm awesome, right? I'll be the best doer ever. And I will tell you that, clearly, there are times when that works. Sometimes in like a technical profession, just being the great technical person gets you promoted and all that. But you'll never reach your full potential until you realize that business is about people. And unless you're just simply going to work for yourself, or you're going to be the boss millennial and you decide that you want to be a micromanaging tyrant, it's always going to be about people, Rob. And this emotional intelligence thing, I think, is so underplayed, particularly in the education process, is we're way more concerned about the technical side and really not as much about the people side. And yet everything about business is about people: customers, vendors, coworkers, the boss. It's all about people.
That's right. That's right. And frankly, in 2019, it's all about change, because that's everything that's changing. And change is about people. And it doesn't matter how you look at this, it's going to reflect back on people. And we have to have that emotional intelligence. It has to be high on both sides, both for the leader and for the subordinate, for the direct report. And I think that as we think about this, Pops, we kind of coming towards the end of the podcast here, I think it's really important. And we want to be really, really clear to the younger generation that's listening to this. Whether you are Gen Z and you've entered the workforce and you've just started, you went into a trade and you're working for someone, you're a millennial. Either way, we would describe you as one of the kids. And we think that it is critical that you take the time and, frankly, invest the time to get to know your leader and to understand where they're coming from, even if they are a huge pain and you feel like they are not worth the space they are occupying. You should still invest time to get to know them. So, Pops, a couple of principles here that we can share with the kids on how they can engage with the boomer.
Well, I want to go back to what our listener Tom DeHaven, when he wrote in, he described a particular circumstance where he really felt like they lost a really high-performing millennial employee, and it was just because, Rob, there was no alignment. There was this complete swing and miss because the employee wanted something but didn't have the conversation with the boss, and just wound up saying, hey, I'm done, I'm going to leave. And they lost a good employee, and they probably would have been willing to accommodate them at this employee at a certain level. I think the first thing we got to tell millennials is, look, you cannot be afraid, regardless of your personality style. You can't be afraid to simply go sit down and have a conversation with the boss, even though they may disagree with things that you say and do. If you say, listen, I just want to be upfront about some things, and I want to ask what it is that I would need to do in order to make those things happen. And I want to kind of help you, or have you help me rather, draw up a game plan to get to where I'm going.
Yeah, and let's be clear, emotional intelligence is key, because I have someone that I've worked with very closely that when this person tried to do that, it came across as whiny, me. And all you were doing is feeding that stereotype. So while I think that advice is so sound and so spot on, it comes with a gigantic asterisk that says you must do it the right way. You can't make it about you. You must make it about the outcome, what's best for the organization and for the team, not about you. Otherwise, you're going to be one of those typical whiny millennials.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think bringing that up in the conversation is the perfect way to avoid the problem, to say, listen, the last thing I want to do is come across as whiny or needy or
entitled.
Right. All I want to do is have an open and honest discussion and be frank about what my career goals are, or what's important to me now, or something that I truly need. I'm willing to do what I need to do in order to get to that point, unless of course it's unreasonable or you completely reject it out of hand. But I want to get clarity on what those things would be, and I want to create that dialogue so we don't misunderstand one another. So don't misunderstand where I'm coming from. Stating the obvious and getting the potential negatives out into the atmosphere there where they're being discussed, Rob, many times will take the air out of those problems.
No, you're exactly right. It's so important to have that dialogue and to engage your emotional intelligence and think about what your boss wants out of that conversation as well. It's not about you. It's about the outcome you're trying to achieve, and ensure that you don't put your ego and yourself and the fact that you've always been the center of everything. You got to remove that, and you have to look at it from the boss's lens. That's what's going to drive success. Truly. Have the dialogue and understand the perspective of the other person. In order to do that, you have to have that relationship.
Yeah, and listen, again, I'm gonna refer back to my sales career. Forget the word selling. Don't let that turn you off. Let's just use the word persuasion. When you're trying to persuade people to take your point of view and to do something positive with it, the best way to do that, according to every psychologist and authority out there, is to first understand what is important to the other person and help them get there. I mean, we go all the way back to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, late 80s, seek first to understand. And whether we're talking about the boss or the kid, the boomer or the millennial, typically what we're doing is saying, no, you need to understand me. And if your boss does that, millennial, then no, it's not right, but it doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. Flip the script, do what is right regardless, and you'll get what you want out of that whole thing.
That's right, man. I think that's the takeaway. Like, the parting gift that we leave you is, look, back to kindergarten. Just because someone else did it doesn't mean it's okay for you to do it. Right. Just because the boss stereotypes our entire generation does not mean we should do it to them. Okay, so let's do the right thing, to go all cheesy on this. Right? Be the change you want to see in the world. I mean, do what is right, not what other people do. Don't conform, but choose to set yourself apart and do it the right way. That's how you are going to achieve success over the long term.
Absolutely. Too many of us, regardless of generation or gender or anything else, we're more concerned about being right than simply doing the right thing that's in our best interest, right?
Yeah. Which is funny, because being right often gets us the wrong outcome, not the outcome we want.
That's my point. That is exactly my point. Hey, I won the battle, lost the war, whatever. Yeah. So it makes absolutely no sense. Listen, as we get out of here, Rob, when you make the boss's job easy, it's going to reflect well on you. I mean, that's one of the big principles. Make the job easy for the boss. Give them what they want. Help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. They're going to see you in a completely different light. I think that's going to make the job a lot easier for you in the long run.
No, that's exactly right. And we want to be really clear. We're not saying that you need to stay around and be a whipping person and just get beat up on.
No.
Extend it, try it, do it. And if you work for a terrible leader, there's lots of options out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We get that a lot. What should I do? Hey, ultimately, you make the decision you're working for the wrong person.
Right.
You need to seek a change. Hey, thanks for joining us. Episode 46. Been great to have you on board. Is it a waste of time to understand the boss? Absolutely not. Hey, follow me at Kelly Riggs, at Robbie Riggs, at Counter Mentors. Make sure you find all of our past episodes on iTunes and at Counter Mentors next time. We'll see you.
Thanks for listening to the Counter Mentor Leadership Podcast. If you like the show, you can give Robbie a trophy by going to iTunes and posting a review of the show. Reviews help the show get noticed. So if you post a review, send us a note and we'll send you a free autographed hardcover copy of the book. Just make sure you say something nice to build up his little self-esteem. By the way, you can find our book and previous podcasts at countermentors.com. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Opinions expressed by guests may not represent the opinions of the hosts.